Hey folks, welcome to Mark Kelly Farm. If you have not been here before, we have a homestead here in the middle of Nebraska, and we have over 260, I think this would be 265 videos to show you how to do stuff the old way and allows you to follow along here on the farm with what we do. Today we're going to get back into some canning with our brand new Presto digital pressure canner. So if you're interested in one of those, we'll show you how it works, and we're going to can something a little bit different today. So stick around and we'll show you how to do it. So if you're new to the channel, we have just acquired not one but two of these Presto digital pressure canners. They're automatic, they're electric, and they are an absolute joy to use. So what we're going to can today is some potatoes. Now what you might be saying at this point is, ooh, canned potatoes, those are gross. Well, the ones in the cans that you purchase at the store, they are kind of gross. But if you've never had a potato out of a glass canning jar, it's a completely different flavor, different experience, because the potatoes don't pick up any flavors from the glass jars like they do in the metal cans that they put those in. So glass does not hold on to any flavors and does not transfer any flavors. So you're going to get the same flavor in your product as what you put in. So forget about those nasty canned potatoes. So let's get right after it. We have peeled 10 pounds of our beautiful Yukon Gold potatoes. And you put them in water after you get them peeled because you don't want your potatoes to oxidize and turn brown, just like you would do with apples or any other vegetable that oxidizes quickly. So what we're going to do now is we're going to cut these potatoes into about 1/2-inch cubes. Now there are some people that can potatoes whole, and if they're small enough and you can fit enough in a jar, you can do that. But these are fairly good sized potatoes. We'd only get probably 3 in a quart jar, or 4 if we were lucky. But after cubing these, we're going to be able to fill jars a lot fuller. We've got all of our potatoes cut up now into about 1/2-inch pieces, and they're all still submerged in the water. You can see how the water's kind of cloudy a little bit. That is the starch coming out of those potatoes. And there are potatoes that have more starch in them than the yellow potatoes. That's why I like using the yellow potatoes. So now what we're going to do is I'm going to take about 1/2 cup of salt, and we're going to put that in our potatoes, and we'll stir it up a little bit. And what that salt's going to do, we do the same thing with our zucchini relish when we make that, and with our pickles. The salt is going to draw some more of that moisture out of those potatoes as it sits. We're going to let these sit for about 3 hours, and then we're going to rinse them out real good, get more of the starch off of them, and then we'll pack them into the jars. Now a good tip when you're cutting your potatoes, use one of these cheese knives that got the little dimples on the sides, and that keeps your potatoes from suctioning to your knife where you can't get your potatoes off. Because the potatoes are so dense that anybody that's ever chopped potatoes knows that they stick to the knife and they're hard to get off. But with this kind of knife, it'll go through like a breeze, and you'll have a lot less effort. And yes, I did say put them into jars. Now folks that have canned potatoes before and are experienced in canning would say, no, you're supposed to cook those potatoes for 10 minutes before you put them into the jar. And according to about 90% of the recipes on the internet, they would be correct in saying that. But when I do things, I like to use a lot of deductive reasoning and some good common sense. And I can't find anywhere on the internet that says why you can't cold pack potatoes, because you can really cold pack just about anything else. Now, the ones that do say you can cold pack potatoes say do it at your own risk, but it works for us. And that's the same disclaimer I'm going to give you, because it works for us. We've never had a problem. But, folks, use common sense with any canned food. If it looks bad, smells bad, or the jar isn't sealed, it probably is bad, and I wouldn't eat it. If it's got fuzz growing on it, I wouldn't eat it. But the first thing I do when I go pull a jar out of the pantry is I push down on the top of the jar to see if it's still sealed. Because anything that, for some reason, that has bacteria growing in it, it's going to start giving off gases as it wants to decompose, and it's going to break the seal on that jar because the inside pressure of the jar is going to increase, and you're no longer going to be sealed. So if a jar's been sitting in the pantry for a while and it's not sealed, don't eat it, folks. It's common sense. So the thought process I went to trying to figure out why on earth couldn't I cold pack potatoes. The way I have these potatoes cut in little 1/2-inch pieces, they're going to cook just fine in that jar for the 45 minutes that we're going to cook them under pressure. There is absolutely nothing that can survive in that jar for 45 minutes under pressure, 40 minutes or whatever it is. It's all going to die at that high pressure and high heat. Also, the new canner that we got, because we're cold packing, we don't have to warm the jars, and we're pressure canning, so we don't have to sterilize the jars. So we'll put the jars in the canner in the initial phase, and they're going to cook for 10 minutes just in the jar warming cycle, and then they're going to stay hot until the canner heats up to pressure, and before that it has a preheat mode before you even put it into the pressure mode. So those potatoes are cooking for quite some time before you actually go even into the pressure mode. And everything in that jar has to raise up to the temperature of the water around it, otherwise it's not going to boil. So the inside of that whole canner is up to temperature before it even starts counting down on the canning cycle. This is why I just don't worry about that, folks, because it's got to be fine with all of that. You'll find that most of the time when they come up with these canning recipes, they go way overboard on the safety practices on some of this stuff. If you look back to what some of our ancestors used to do and how they used to can and got away with it, nobody died, especially because they used common sense and didn't eat food that looked bad. I mean, sometimes they would just put hot stuff in a jar and turn it upside down, let it seal. I mean, that's how easy that they did it a lot back then. But I'm not recommending you do that. But I'm telling you, there is wiggle room when they come up with these rules. Now, one of the major rules that you've seen me violate on this channel before, and people wanted to put me in canner's prison for this, is I've had an automatic pressure cooker for years. And people say, oh, you can't can in those, you can't can in those. And they would lose their minds on the internet about this stuff. But I always do my homework, and I did my homework on those. And they cook at 15 psi, and they automatically adjust for the altitude and everything, just like my new pressure canner does. It used to do everything. You'd set the time and everything, and you could do it. The problem was USDA didn't put their little stamp on it. Now, with this new canner, USDA put their little stamp on it, and that's why they're basically non-existent right now. You can't find these canners. But if you have an automatic pressure cooker, and mine only fits pint jars, so I can only do pint jars in it. If you have like an Instapot or something like that, Instapots have been proven to cook at 15 psi, so I think you'd be safe. Any pressure cooker that you have, check with the manufacturer and see what pressure it cans at. So as long as you go by that, as long as you're making 15 psi and you set the required amount of time that's required for these recipes, you're going to be just fine. We've been doing it for years, and it is possible. So if you have a nice big Instapot or something like that, it could do some pint jars in it, knock yourself out. I think you're safe as can be. Again, do it at your own risk. With the litigious world that we live in these days, you got to say do it at your own risk. Now, if you're going to use your automatic pressure cooker for canning, make sure you have a trivet or something in the bottom to hold the jars off of the bottom. This is just a metal disc that creates a space between the jars and the bottom of the pan. And what that does is it keeps the bubbles from forming directly under the jar and rattling the jars around in your canner. And then after you do that, if you don't have one of those round ones, you can find round ones like this. This is like a little cooling rack that you could throw in the bottom that would keep your jars off of the bottom. But once you get your jars in there, make sure that your jars will not interfere with anything under the lid. You can see that there's some things that stick out underneath the lid on automatic pressure cookers or canners. Make sure the jars do not interfere with any of that stuff. So some of your smaller canners, you might have to use half pints instead of pints. Now Instapot actually has a model that they've put out that has a canning function button on it. And it's supposedly, they're saying you can use it for canning, which I'm sure you could, because they have said that it cooks at 15 psi, but because they didn't have the approval from the feds or whoever, people lost their mind again and they didn't want to use that for canning. Although I do not think it is for quart jars. I think you can only do pint jars in it. Now, if you're one of those people that say prove it that you can use it, like me, you just apply simple physics. So an open kettle of boiling water will only get to 212 degrees because that's the boiling point of water. It'll escape into the atmosphere at that point and will not get any hotter. The only way you can get water hotter is to put it under pressure. So the minimum temperature that you're supposed to be able to cook at pressure canning is 240 degrees. Now water reaches 240 degrees at about 11 psi. So if you're cooking at 15 psi, you're well above the margin. And some people say, well, if you don't have a temperature or a temperature gauge or a thermometer on your canner, there's no way for you to know. Well, I call bull honky on that, because again, if you're at 11 psi, you're cooking at about 240 degrees. If you're at 15 psi, you're cooking at about 250 degrees. Whether you got a thermometer on it or not, you can't cook at that temperature without being at that pressure. So you don't have to have a temperature probe to necessarily know that you're cooking hot enough. All right, we're back. It's been about 5 hours actually. We rinsed all of our potatoes and then we packed them in our pint jars. And I put a half a teaspoon of salt in each jar, and then we filled it up with our good tap water. It's well water, so we don't have to worry about chlorine, up to the shoulder in the jar. And then now we're going to put our lids and our rings on them. And we've already got water up to our line in our canner, and we'll put the jars in our canner. So there we go. Just for your reference, those 10 pounds of potatoes did exactly 8 pints with just a handful left over that I put in the fridge in the water. Just cook them up for breakfast. But 8 pints fit in this canner unless you're doing wide mouth, and I think it goes down to 7. So we're ready to go. Let's put our lid on. Put it into the locked position. Now, to start the canner, you need to be in the vent position. The book will actually tell you to pull the regulator off. But it'll also tell you the reason they do that is because they don't want people to forget to leave this in the vent position. But I've been doing this for years and I can remember how to do this stuff. So I just leave this on and I leave it in the vent position. We've already got it plugged in. We're going to close our pressure sensor like that. And when you plug it in, it automatically comes up to pressure can. So we select that. And then it's going to ask you for the minutes. And for pint jars on potatoes, you're going to do 35 minutes. So we set that. And it says insert jars. We've already done that. It's telling you to insert empty jars. But since we've cold packed, we've gone ahead and put our full jars in there. So now it's going to the warming cycle where it'll preheat your jars if you were going to hot pack. But again, it's going to heat everything together in there. All right, our canner has beeped. It is done with the warming phase. It says fill jars, which we've already done, so we don't need to take the lid off and do any of that. Press our little button, and it's going to heat. It's going to start going into the boiling phase, and it'll go into the vent phase. And we'll show you that. We're still vent open here. So canner automatically went into vent mode, and then it vented for 10 minutes. And now we come up here, we close our vent, press our button, and she goes into cannon mode. Alright, since we've closed the vent, it's come up to pressure. It's been about 5 minutes or so, or less. Our little pressure vent has popped up, which doesn't let you open the lid no more. And from here on out, this canner is going to do everything itself. Once it builds up to pressure, this counter will start counting down. And then once it does 35 minutes worth of canning, it's going to go into cooling mode. And then after cooling mode, it'll shut itself down and stop. So it's 11 o'clock at night, folks. I'm going to go to bed and let this canner do its thing. So that's another cool thing about this canner. You don't have to sit and babysit it. So we'll see you in the morning. Alright, it's the next morning. We got our potatoes done. We pulled them out of the canner. So it's going to be nice having these potatoes in our root cellar, because it's going to be quick and easy to make a dish with these potatoes. Not only going to save you time because the potatoes are already cooked, it's going to save you money too, because anybody that knows spends too much time out in the garden all day, and you come in and you really don't feel like cooking dinner. What do? You go out to dinner and spend money. So if you can make it quick and easy, it's a plus for everybody. Some of the things you can do, you can add these potatoes to like a soup or stew dish late in the game where they don't need to be cooked. You can pull them out and just mix some butter and some parsley with them, and maybe a little garlic, and heat them up in a saucepan, and you've got a really good side dish for that. You can make mashed potatoes out of these really quickly with some butter and some salt and pepper, a little bit of sour cream, maybe a little more garlic in that. Really quick mashed potatoes. You can make a really quick potato salad for like lunch out of these. You can dump them in a skillet for breakfast, add some saute some onions and some peppers real quick in some butter, and then dump these potatoes in and brown them a little bit. You got some good home fries. You can make potato pancakes. You can do all kinds of things with these potatoes because they're pre-cooked and it'll go really fast. So hope you've enjoyed this video. I promise we're almost done with the canning videos. We'll spare you some of that, but we've been trying to show you what this brand new canner can do and why we really enjoy it. So till next time, stay safe, stay healthy. We love you guys. Come back and see us.